Putin declares martial law in Ukraine's illegitimately acquired regions. Riga, Latvia. Russian President Vladimir Putin imposed martial law Wednesday in Ukrainian territories illegally annexed by Moscow last month, signaling an intensifying effort to achieve his war objectives, and opening another dark and uncertain chapter for thousands of Ukrainians living under military occupation. Martial law, which takes effect at midnight, imposes strict military controls over the occupied areas of Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson and Zaporizhia and gives Russia's military and proxy authorities broad powers of arrest and detention. The proclamation is predicated on the idea that Russian territory is being attacked as Russia loses ground in southern Ukraine, despite the fact that the annexation of the four territories was illegal under international law and was roundly condemned by the UN last week. Putin said the four regions had been under martial law before Russia claimed to have annexed and absorbed them earlier this month. "We now need to legalize this state in accordance with Russian legislation," he said. "We now need to legalize this state in accordance with Russian legislation. Because the territories have been under military occupation for many months, and residents have already been living under draconian restrictions," Putin's declaration seemed at least partly designed for a domestic audience, including pro-war hawks who have criticized Russia's military failures. It also created some legal cover, at least under Russian law, for an array of potential abuses by military authorities and their proxies. Mihailo Podolyak, a top advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, stated that the imposition of martial law could only be seen as a pseudo-legalization of plundering of Ukrainians' property. Could only be seen as a pseudo-legalization of plundering of Ukrainians' property, wrote Podolyak in a tweet. Putin's order comes after 10 days of consistent drone and airstrike attacks on Ukrainian civilian infrastructure. This is part of a clear strategy shift by Moscow, which aims to make up for battlefield losses with superior long-range missile capability and a sizable fleet of attack drones made in Iran. The new developments provide another challenge for Kiev and its Western backers. NATO members, including the United States, have pledged to provide more air defense systems to Ukraine as soon as possible in an effort to resist Russia's plan to deprive the nation of heat and electricity as winter approaches. Speaking during a meeting of Russia's Security Council Wednesday, Putin said he would also be establishing a new coordinating committee for the areas under martial law, to be led by Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin. The martial law orders were unanimously ratified by the Federation Council, the upper house of the Russian parliament, in an extraordinary session late Wednesday. But Russia does not fully control the four regions it claimed to annex, and Ukrainian forces have made substantial advances in recent weeks to reclaim previously occupied territories. Russia has routinely detained, imprisoned, tortured, and executed Ukrainians in the areas it has taken since the invasion began on February 24. Its forces are also suspected of committing a number of war crimes. This is the case even without a declaration of martial law. Alexei Danilov, the Secretary of Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, agreed that martial law was only an attempt by the Kremlin to give domestic legal support for future violations against Ukrainians who reject Russia's occupation and to punish those who are still loyal to Kyiv. Putin's martial law in the annexed regions is preparation for the mass deportation of the Ukrainian population to depressed areas of Russia, in order to change the ethnic composition of the occupied territory, Danilov tweeted. He said the forced relocations should be regarded as a war crime. Putin's declaration came after Russian proxy officials in Kherson reported that they had started evacuating roughly 50,000 residents from the city because Russian officials anticipated a significant Ukrainian attack. Colonel General Sergei Shurovikin, who was named earlier this month as the leader of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, stated he could not rule out tough decisions. How the military tactical situation plays out will determine our plans and course of action for the city of Kherson. I'd like to stress again how difficult things are right now, Shurovikin remarked in a state television interview. Uncertainty existed around whether the difficult choices may mean a military withdrawal from the city or a major conflict should Ukrainian forces invade. Ukrainian troops have been advancing slowly in the Kherson region in recent weeks, destroying bridges and cutting supply lines, increasing the pressure on Russian forces on the west bank of the Dnieper River. Though the Russians have been pushed back, they appeared to be making a more orderly, strategic retreat than they did last month in the northeastern Kharkiv region, where they fled haphazardly, abandoning vehicles and equipment. On Wednesday, Russia used ships and buses to transport citizens out of Kherson, while its troops prevented private vehicles from entering the city. The Kherson area is a major component of Putin's coveted land bridge from Russia's continental territory to Crimea, the peninsula that Russia unlawfully invaded and seized in 2014. The loss of Kherson, the capital of one of 4 territories that were illegally annexed by Putin, would be a major blow to Russia's war aims. The city was the first regional capital seized in the invasion and served as a Russian logistical and political base in efforts to extend its control across southern Ukraine, including to the port city of Odessa. Resistance by the Ukrainian military halted those efforts. But Ukraine's attempts to recapture the city of Kherson have been slow, and have come at a high cost in casualties as Russia deployed its most experienced forces to the region. Russian officials and their proxies in Ukraine sent out text messages Wednesday instructing people to leave, warning that Ukrainian forces could bombard Kherson, or attempt to flood the city by destroying a nearby hydroelectric dam. Throughout the war, however, it is Russia that has repeatedly launched major attacks on cities such as Mariupol and Kharkiv, ruthlessly hitting civilian targets and destroying apartment blocks, hospitals, schools and vital infrastructure. Attacking civilian infrastructure, which has no military purpose, is a war crime. NATO countries offer handful of new pledges amid Ukrainian pleas on air defense. Despite the evidence in recent weeks of Russian forces surrendering, retreating or refusing to fight, Shurvikin claimed that it was the Ukrainian forces marshaled to retake Kherson who had low morale. Despite the evidence in recent weeks of Russian forces surrendering, retreating or refusing to fight, Shurvikin claimed that it was the Ukrainian forces marshaled to retake Kherson who had low morale. The general claimed Russia's strategy was to take care of every soldier and methodically grind the advancing enemy and to avoid civilian casualties.